Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Kelly Wright Show. It's good of you to join us today. We hope that you're doing well. And tonight we focused on the COVID-19 pandemic and the disparities within the African American community. In my opening observations, it goes like this. We are still seeing that African Americans and people of color are disproportionately impacted by this COVID-19 pandemic. So tonight we will hear more of what these disparities look like and how it affects us environmentally, economically, and in terms of our overall health and well-being. It's important to note that on Monday's program, we heard from Dr. Benjamin Chavis as well as Dr. Ricky Keys. Both pointed out the disparities that do exist and showed the numbers to prove it. And then Dr. Benjamin Chavis went one step further. He cited the UN Charter of 1948 on genocide. And in that charter, he talked about certain conditions that would lead to a genocide of African American people and people of color in this country if our government leaders and health experts and corporations continue to cause more disparity rather than bridging the divide. A lot of heavy stuff to talk about, and we continue on with that tonight. And those are my opening observations. Welcome to the program. So we have a lot to discuss tonight. You've heard me talk about on this show the fact that African Americans are experiencing disproportionately adverse impacts from the coronavirus. And this is due to the health disparities that we have within our community, pre-existing disparities that have been there long before coronavirus and will likely be there afterwards. Well, two people joining me now are trying to change that around and stem the tide as we deal with the current clear and present danger of now and making sure it doesn't happen in the future. Representing the National Black Caucus of State Legislators is the chair, Gilda Cobb-Hunter, and a former member of South Carolina's representation and still a member of the caucus is Harold Mitchell. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Kelly.
Chairperson Cobb-Hunter, I want to start with you because this is something that's been near and dear to you. You've actually sent a message to the President of the United States, the Vice President, the members of the House and the Senate, all the members of Congress, stating that there are health disparities within the African American community that should be addressed. And this was before the COVID-19 pandemic actually hit. I think you delivered this sometime in December, is that right?
That's correct, Kelly. And quite frankly, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators has been working on the issue of health disparities for almost a little more than 20 years now. Throughout those 20 years, we have passed resolutions addressing various aspects of health disparities. And at our Fort Lauderdale conference, December of 2019, we took another stab at it by adopting two resolutions that were prescient, quite frankly. One, dealing with healthy communities. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Ricky Keys, who was very instrumental in helping NBCSL draft that resolution, deals with health equity and talks about all those social determinants that make up a healthy community. The other one is the environmental justice resolution that we also adopted and passed, which talked about the environmental impact on communities of color.
Thank you for that. And it's amazing that you've been doing that for 20 years. So thank you for doing that work as well. Now, Harold, she was just talking about environmental justice, and I understand that is something that you have some expertise in. And we've heard about environmental injustice taking place within the African American community. How dire is it right now?
Well, first I would say that it's dire, but a year ago, 2019, NBCSL convened a meeting with EJ leaders, environmental justice leaders from around the country to sit down and talk about the impacts with landfills, petrochemical facilities, waste incinerators, nuclear, polluting industries, and even transit around these communities, these vulnerable communities where you see a high disproportionate impact of asthma, heart disease, diabetes from these polluting facilities. And this is where you see something like COVID being the predator of being able to, with these folks that are sick in these vulnerable communities, who a lot of times, more than 90% of the times, don't have access to healthcare and are basically sitting ducks for this virus that is taking a total toll on these communities.
What can we do beyond our legislative efforts to actually put some teeth into this, so we can take a bite out of these injustices and these inequities so that we can remedy the situation?
Okay. First, I would say back to the Clinton administration in 1992, President Clinton issued an executive order on environmental justice, which started addressing a lot of these impacts across the country. You named it, as far as the Latino community, the tribal community, the Appalachian region. But what we see right now is a rollback with this administration, who's even now currently has rolled back those regulatory guidelines on polluting industries, is basically giving them free will to pollute at this point without being with any kind of oversight. Some of the solutions that we see that these communities need is access to healthcare. A lot of our southern states that did not expand Medicaid, what you're looking at is not having a medical home for people that can treat the diabetes, heart disease, asthma. When you're looking at some of these impacts where these communities have been inundated with toxic poisons, this disease or virus that's out there right now is impacting them because they don't have a medical home, and they're being hit hard than any other part of the population that we see.
And not to mention, to add to what you're talking about, would be the testing phase. I want to talk to you about that in just a moment. Stay with me. We're going to go to a break. When we come back, I'll continue my conversation with Chairperson and South Carolina Representative Gilda Cobb-Hunter, as well as Harold Mitchell. This is a very important topic, folks. This is why we're drilling down on the disparities and why they exist to begin with, because if we don't arm ourselves with knowledge, we won't have the political power, nor the political will, nor the know-how to go out and fight it. So we're coming back with more after this. Welcome back to the program. So I'm talking to the chair of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, Gilda Cobb-Hunter, as well as the former member of the South Carolina representation, Harold Mitchell, who's also a member of this fine organization. Gilda, you were talking about how for 20 years you've been out there letting people know what the disparity issue is. And Harold, you've been talking about the environmental injustices, and we've gone back to the Clinton administration, what they were trying to do through executive order. And my concern is right now that as we continue to go through this COVID-19 pandemic, we are seeing African Americans perish or take this too lightly. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair statement. Very fair statement. A lot of misinformation, Kelly, about who can come down with this disease. Black folk, when this disease first started, there were folk who going out saying, oh, well, Black people can't catch it because of the melanin in our skin. We got to be smarter than this. This stuff is serious. This virus is serious. There are a lot of us who have family, friends, people we know, we've worked with over the years who've died. And so a part of NBCSL's message to NGA was, we want to work with you. A part of the resources, for example, we talked about, we need to educate our community. Across the country and a lot of states, there used to be, in some states, offices of minority health, where education, outreach, awareness was a real critical part of what they did. And over the years, depending on the states, those offices are no longer in place or as effective as they once were. And so what we believe at NBCSL is that as state legislators, we are close to the ground. We partner any way with other organizations, Urban League, NAACP, National Action Network, Rainbow Push. We want to work with those and other groups to educate our community, increase their awareness so they will take this seriously and understand y'all don't need to be having no cookouts and fish fries and card parties. That doesn't make sense, people. We are dying, and there are a lot of people who might not be sad that we are. So we got to be serious about it.
You're watching The Kelly Wright Show. We'll be back with more of my interview just after this. We're hearing a lot of strong statements coming from legislators as well as members of the Black press who are deeply concerned. And even on this program, we have voiced those concerns and those objections to states reopening too early and not really consulting with the leadership and putting the proper things, as Gilda just talked about, into place.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say it's visually, you can see clearly what's taking place. I mean, the president, when he looked like he was overwhelmed, looking like there was a little bit of concern when he stated that this was going to go away quick when those numbers started skyrocketing. But the minute you saw folks started to talking about the disproportionate number of African Americans impacted, that whole shift turned at that point to saying, let's open up. You begin to see a lot of the groups with the Don't Tread on Me Trump supporters, even with the Confederate flags talking about opening up. All of this opening them up statements came about during the exact same time when we saw folks talking about the disproportionate number of African Americans, Black and Browns that were impacted by the virus. That's what I'm hearing a lot of people say, that there was concern until it looked like it was them, not us. Now, all of a sudden, you see people in protest, they have their mask on, they're doing their drive-arounds, they're not standing close together, but they're driving around saying, let's open up, and look at what they're opening up. They know the disproportionate number of African Americans that are impacted. For 30, 40 years, environmental justice leaders have talked about health disparities. This is nothing new. So you know, if you have a segment of the population with all these different diseases and impacts, and this is where it looks like the virus is taking headway with, let's open that up and let's take them out.
Wow. So let's take a deep breath here, because we know that racism exists in America.
Yeah.
We know that there's institutional racism, there's a systemic brand of racism, there's racism. But let's take a deep breath and get to the heart of the matter, and that is, how do we get past this? How do we deal with this? How do we solve this?
Well, there's no magic bullet, no silver bullet or magic wand. We solve it by doing much of what you and I are doing, and people across the country have been doing for quite some time now, and that is having real conversations about institutional racism, implicit bias, all of those things. Because the bottom line is the systemic issues are based on race, have always been, but we are, as a country, very hesitant to really confront and deal with issues of race. At NBCSL, as a part of the Quad Caucus, we have been working for the last 6 years now, working within our own caucuses on issues of race. And so we've got to talk about it, and we've got to be about the business of doing something. I am hopeful that in this upcoming presidential election, that we will have a candidate in Vice President Biden, who is the presumptive nominee, who will move beyond lip service and conversation and actually bring on board someone with experience in dealing with systemic problems, systemic solutions, because it's not about creating another social program. That's not what it's about. It's about recognizing that this country is built on inequity, and we're going to have to come to terms with that before we're all going to be able to, in the words of Rodney King, just get along. Can we all just get along?
I applaud you both for the excellent work you're doing. It's not easy, it's hard work, and I'm rolling up my sleeves to be engaged and involved with you. I think at this point we need to consider having more of these conversations and not be afraid
Yes.
of the dialogue, but bringing it front and center. So please come back to the program.
Well,
Let-
Kelly, on behalf of NBCSL, as president of the organization, thank you for having us on. Thank you for your commitment to continue educating your audience about this issue. That's the only way we're going to beat this thing. Thanks so much.
Well, Gilda, you're welcome. I can tell you though, it's emotionally hurtful for me.
Yes. Yeah. Same.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're better than this.
Yeah.
It reminds you of too many things I've been through personally. And,
yeah, I hear you. I feel you, brother. Well,
Yeah.
call on us anytime. We'd love to continue the conversation.
I want to go one step further. I think at some point, even virtually, if we have to do it, we need to have a town hall and
Oh, wow. We'd love to do
people
that. And
into
perhaps Dr. Chavis and NMPA might be interested in co-sponsoring it with you and us.
yeah, with us as well.
That's me trying to executive produce your show. I'm sorry, Kelly.
It's okay. You're welcome anytime, Gilda. Again, thank you both.
Thank you.
Let's continue on the good fight. Harold, thank you. Harold Mitchell and Gilda Cobb-Hunter, the NBCSL, the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. Great work you're doing.
Thank you, Kelly. Stay safe. We need you out here.
Welcome back to the program. As you know, on Monday, I launched a series within this program called Strengthening the Family. And the idea and the concept behind that is for all of us to make our families stronger. #family strong. And to help us do that, to help us maneuver through all of the things we're confronted with due to the COVID-19 pandemic, is licensed clinical social worker Nikessa Craig. She joins us now from the Norfolk, Virginia area, and it's so good of you to join us and really to weigh in on this important issue of making our families stronger during these unprecedented times of a coronavirus. What have you been able to impart to families to help them strengthen their families?
Well, thank you for having me first off. What I can say is that what we're noticing is that a lot of families, a lot of individuals, and I think even us collectively as a community, are really dealing with a grief experience. And so when we talk about that, it looks like an ambiguous loss, which means that typically when we're having a grief experience, we would be able to go into traditional rituals, we would extend compassion, patience. But with this sort of a loss during the pandemic, there's so much uncertainty that people are really trying to struggle with the challenges of figuring out how they actually feel, the roller coaster of emotions that typically come when we're experiencing the losses. And so within a family, we have a loss of our routine. We're not going to school, we're not going to work. Some of us are losing our financial stability, our ability to make choices about what we do with ourselves and our lives, our plans. And so all of that can be very overwhelming. But looking at it from a grief perspective allows families, parents, kids, those of us as colleagues to really extend some of those same courtesies that we would during a grief process, such as the compassion and the understanding.
I'm curious, for those who have children, especially the young ones, children who are at the age of 5 and they're comprehending what's going on, and maybe mommy or daddy is out there on the front lines helping with health issues, and they're coming back home to talk about it. What happens if a 5-year-old says, I'm afraid? I'm afraid of dying from COVID-19. How do we best advise our children at this particular time when they're not going to school, they're being homeschooled? How do we help them maneuver through this?
You know, I think it's important to really validate the experience of being afraid. And I think having an environment where it's okay to be scared is really, really helpful. You know, as a parent, you want to be able to say, I'm afraid too. And you want to give the child permission to feel how they feel. You don't want to really minimize that fear and tell them, don't worry about it. You want to actually go there with them and say, hey, it is a scary time, but this is what we can do. So with children, after you acknowledge, the emotion, you can go to a place where you give them action steps, because we all feel a little more confident. We tend to feel a little more reassured when there is something that we feel like we can contribute to actually minimizing that fear. So it could be something as simple as really teaching kids how to really wash their hands. You know, teaching them how they can really support mommy and daddy as we telework. That's a big stress for parents lately. Trying to school, trying to make sure there are meals prepared, and actually working at home as well. So this space is actually creating opportunities for children to be more action oriented. They're not overscheduled, they're not stressed out, and by the time they get home, they just have to go to bed. You know, there's opportunities for them to contribute to the household. Maybe they can make the sandwiches. I'm seeing siblings get together and meal prep for the family for the week, because mom is a frontline worker and she's a single parent. So there are a lot of things that can be done, but I would start first with really acknowledging the experience and the emotion with children. I would talk about it with them on an age appropriate level. And I would really be cautious of how much of that breaking news, moment to moment update atmosphere they're really taking in. Because what we do know is that fear is contagious. You know, just like the virus, emotions are contagious. So we want to be mindful of what we're teaching them, and keep steps geared towards the actions that they can take as well.
Nikessa, I appreciate you. Nikessa Craig joining me on the show today. She is there at Whole Journey, and that's your organization that you are working with, and you're doing some great things there in the Hampton Roads, Virginia area. You're operating in Chesapeake and Richmond, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Well, I'm delighted to have you as a guest on the show. Please come back, because what you're saying is very important to strengthening our families and making the family stronger, so that we can, we're not invincible, but we can deal with this coronavirus and come out of it, I think, more intact because of the advice that you've passed on to us. So please come back on the program again.
Thank you for having me, and be safe.
My pleasure. You be safe too. God bless you. We're coming back with more of the Kelly Wright Show right after this. Welcome back to the program. I'm delighted to introduce to you a lovely couple that's engaged, actively engaged in helping so many of our youth learn the profession of architectural design. And I always dreamed of becoming an architect, and I became a journalist instead. So joining me is Tark and Tiffany Abdullah, a great couple out of the Atlanta, Georgia area. Good of you to join us today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's our pleasure.
I really want to talk about this because you created a company called, or a program called TCAD. Tell me about that. And then, Tark, let's get into your unusual story, and Tiffany, your story as well.
Okay. Yeah, so TCAD is the Community Academy for Architecture and Design. The mission of the school is to expose students to architecture and design in a learner-centered environment that promotes creative critical thinking and develops community-conscious leaders. And ultimately, the vision of TCAD is to partner with communities such as the American Institute of Architects, the National Organization of Minority Architects, and other local and national partners. So partnering with communities to develop thriving children and thriving sustainable neighborhoods using architecture and design as the conduit for positive intergenerational transformation.
I think it's a fantastic story, and Tark, just your personal story alone is just like over the moon incredible. If you don't mind, can you share some of your personal story as to how you got to this place of creating TCAD along with your wife?
Yeah, sure, certainly. So I'm six of my mother's seven children, and we were raised in Detroit, Michigan, right in the inner city of Detroit, Michigan. This is a time when this is early 80s, so you can imagine what was happening in Detroit, inner city Detroit, Michigan, around those times as relate to some of the big city syndrome complexes and problems. Um, six of my mom's seven children, and she was reluctant to send us all to public schools simply because of the lack of good public educational options that was present at that time in Detroit, Michigan. So what she would do is homeschool all of my older siblings. So when I became of age, I didn't have that opportunity to actually be homeschooled by her because she fell ill. And so she sent me to private school. So, and my younger brother to private school as well when she could afford it, right? So for me, that meant the second and fourth grades. And after that, the next grade I did was in college, right? So I don't have a high school diploma. I don't have a GED, nor an associate's degree or bachelor's degree, but I have a fully accredited master's degree in architecture from the University of Detroit Mercy, by God's grace. So just as an architect, so I'm a registered architect. I'm registered to practice architecture in Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, and soon to be South Carolina. I'm also a NCARB certificate holder, which means that I'm eligible to practice as a professional architect in all of the continental United States, Canada, Mexico, New Zealand, and Australia after a 3 or 4 day reciprocity process, right? So, but when I was a child, I didn't have access, right? So that's the whole thing about TCAD is providing children access to be able to even be exposed to the field of architecture as a viable career path. At older ages, the school actually starts at kindergarten. So it's a kindergarten through 8th grade curriculum. And we actually start K through 4th grade, and then we add a grade each year to 8th grade. So myself as a child, I always knew I would be an architect because my grandmother put that on me when I was about 3 years old. She said I would be an architect. And ever since then, I always answer that question, what do you want to be when you grow up? I wanted to be an architectural engineer, of course.
You're watching the Kelly Wright Show, and I'm talking to Tariq and Tiffany Abdullah, and a remarkable story about how they met, but also about education and how they're trying to now inspire young people to actively get engaged in the field of architectural design. Stay with me. On the other side of the break, we will talk about how do you do that? How do you teach kids architectural design in this new normal called coronavirus? We'll be back with more after this. So welcome back to the program. I'm talking to Tariq and Tiffany Abdullah, and you've heard about their remarkable story, how they met, and in 6 weeks they were married. So it was love at first sight, as Tiffany said. And so they had a love connection, but also an educational connection, and also a compassionate connection of reaching out to the community to help the community embrace their vision of teaching children from kindergarten how to get involved in their architectural desires. And that aspiration, once it's planted in you, like you said, Tariq, from your grandmother at the age of 3, she put that mark on you that you would become an architect, and indeed you have. So how do you teach this in this age of COVID-19 and in the midst of social and physical distancing?
So, well, first let me tackle how do you teach that period, right? Because a
That's
lot of
a
people
good place to
may be
start.
wondering, how do you actually teach, kindergartners architecture, right? And the answer really is simple, and it is that it's not career driven at that point, right? TCAD, though we do have a nationally recognized high school curriculum that is more career driven. TCAD currently is K through 8, right? And in the lower grades, starting at kindergarten, it's not career driven at all. It's just that we see architecture as the perfect conduit for creative critical thinking and problem solving skills, right? If you think about it, what community will not benefit from a generation of critical design thinkers and problem solvers who have been really studying architecture, engineering, and creative media through their overall curricula, right? We have a proprietary curricula that is really designed to use architecture, engineering, and creative media design studios through project-based learning, right? So we will have projects such as designing bike lanes for communities, right? Or redesigning dilapidated footbridges, in a park, for instance. So you can begin to see how history, how math, even, and history and all of the social study components in terms of Black history, studying Black architects, Black bridge designers here in Georgia. You can get all of the standards through that. So we identify opportunities in the community through projects, and we have a curriculum specialist as well as the school leader assess those opportunities to make sure that we can really streamline the standards through that and teach the standards as relates to Georgia Standards of Excellence. We also identify a number of key components that colleges of architecture use through their accreditation process, such as critical thinking, collaboration, visual design, and graphic design. And these things that as college students, they have to have some level of understanding before they can actually, as they matriculate through a program at the collegiate level. However, with this COVID-19, it really has complicated things dramatically. Currently we have many colleagues that they don't know if there'll be an online school come fall, right? I believe it's California and some school districts out west is talking about starting their school year in October, right? So what does that mean for a charter school that simply is not designed to operate online, right? And I really feel for the schools currently and the school administration and leadership there for all these existing schools that all of a sudden overnight they have to turn into an online school.
I thank you both, Tariq and Tiffany Abdullah. Incredible program that you've designed, and your vision is so timely and so needed, even in this age of COVID-19. I thank you both for weighing in on the program, and we will be back with more of the Kelly Wright Show after this. Welcome back to the program. So now I'd like to introduce to you Erskine Anabitarte. He is a phenomenal songwriter and singer who's been doing some great work on the gospel Christian music scene. And Erskine, I've watched your career and it continues to blossom. You continue to do great work. Tell us about your careers and how it's being impacted with this COVID-19 as all musicians are affected by this.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me on. And a lot of kind and gracious words there. You know, if you're an independent artist like myself, the moniker is that you work hard every day. And if somebody appreciates what it is that you're doing, you're very thankful for that. And so thank you for those accolades. I just think that we work hard every day. But I did an article for the Baptist Press not long ago. Excuse me. It was just sharing about the fact that when you're an artist who has a mission and really believes that the mission is embodied with the music that you do, the circumstances could change all the time. And in fact, as you well know, and your audience well knows, that circumstances do change all the time. But if your mission and the core of what it is that you're doing remains the same, then you just find new ways and new avenues like this Zoom meeting to be able to get your message out and to be able to get your music out.
That's fantastic. And you continue to do that because you have your own show that you're doing, a streaming show. Tell us about that.
Yes, and so I literally just got finished doing that show, and it's called the Erskine Music Show. It's on YouTube, and it's also on Facebook Live. And I just thought, now that I have some time to actually engage in some of the creative side of what it is that I do from a talk show standpoint, I want to make sure that I'm engaging the audience from that vantage point as well. I think a lot of people will hear the music, and that might be a 2 or 3 minute introduction to myself, but then having 20 minutes or 30 minutes to just really soak in and seep in what it is that I'm saying, it gives an audience a different level of connection and a different level of interaction, and I want to be able to provide that for my audience.
Your song, Black and White, addresses all of those issues of racial injustice. And when I remember seeing that, I was appreciating everything that you said in that song, because isn't it something that Sunday still remains the most segregated hour in America, and we've got to do our best, our level best, to change that.
Sure. And so, yeah, I think that it's right to sound the alarm. It's right for us to identify for people what are some of those cultural trends and some of those cultural identities that we live in that cause the COVID-19 crisis to be even more among African Americans. Whenever I was seeing reports of that, you know, as heartbreaking as that was, I could tick off about 2 or 3 different things that is the reason why and the cause for why it would be more prevalent in the African American community and Latino community, just by virtue of the way that we exist in culture and where we find ourselves positioned in culture. And so it's good and thank you very much for sounding the alarm on things like that and making people aware of the fact that there are certain levels of, you know, injustice that still take place. And there are certain things, you know, I don't know how much you'll deal with this on your show, but I know that I went back, you know, a few weeks ago and said, when people are wearing the face coverings, I, as a Black man, feel uncomfortable doing that, going into a store and having people look at me with a face covering on. It just felt weird. It felt awkward to me because that typically comes with a stereotype of a very negative connotation.
Your point is well taken, and I'm glad you brought that up. And Erskine, what can we hear from you in the future? Because there is a future out there. There's a hope and a future. God's plans for us are not for disaster, but for a future and a hope. So in the future, what will we hear from you?
We're going to stay aggressive. We're going to stay wise. And so we're going to try to balance the two of those things. We know there's certain health precautions that we've got to take, and we've got to be serious about those things. Yet at the same time, we want to still be releasing music. I've got a music lyric video that's coming out next week. We're looking toward the next projects that we're going to be releasing. The Erskine Music Show is doing more online concerts. And so just stay posted for all those announcements that we want to make in terms of how we're moving forward in the future. But we're going to keep going forward. We have to.
Well said. And tell us where we can find you on Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah, so the Facebook is my name, Erskine, Erskine Music on Instagram. And you should be able to find everything that you need in terms of my musical catalog on all the streaming services. Unfortunately, the last song that was released hasn't yet come out on iTunes, but I'll make an announcement soon about when that's coming out on iTunes. But Spotify, Google Play, all the other online catalogs should contain my music.
Well, Erskine, I appreciate you, man. We met some years ago there in Nashville during the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. You had performed there, and I had the pleasure of being one of the speakers there, and it was a delightful time for you and I and for all the other people who had gathered there. So keep on keeping on what you're doing, bro, and don't stop doing it.
And the same to you. And at some point, I want to have you come on my show and share about what it is that you're doing, because that will be so insightful for the guests and the people who are a part of that show.
Well, listen, it would be an honor, and I accept that invitation. I appreciate you again. You've been watching with the Erskine, a tidbit of it right here on the Erskine Show on the Kelly Wright Show. And when we come back, we're going to show you his music. It's amazing. So don't go anywhere, because coming back on the other side of this, we'll hear and see his wonderful story, musically said and well written and produced, called Black and White. More of the Kelly Wright Show after this. Welcome back to the program. And now for my final word. As we've seen on today's show, the disparities within the African American community are real, which is why we're finding a high comorbidity rate within the community as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. But there's also cause for not only sounding the alarm, but getting involved, staying engaged, and keeping each other abreast of one fundamental thing, that we must become our brother's keeper and not our brother's killer. Hopefully you've seen that we have to keep our families strong, and let's continue to strengthen our families. Because at the end of the day, the greatness of a nation begins in the homes of its people. I hope you've been righted, ignited, and united to do just that. Make your family stronger and keep spreading love, freedom, and peace. And now here's Erskine with a very good music video about black and white. See you later. Peace out.
The most segregated time in our country is Sunday morning, 11 o'clock.